Even my editor was like, oh my God, like this chick was in the news. See if you can reach her. And then I did, right? So stories that touch you, stories that you're curious about, authors that your kids like, musicians, YouTubers, there's endless ideas. I literally have shot 75 episodes in the last 3 months and I'm like, I can't get them out quick enough.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Podcast Success Secrets. I'm very excited about this one. On this episode, we have someone on who was a former producer for the Jerry Springer Show, which was a hot show, pretty rowdy show, and some MTV shows. So you have a lot of experience. I actually didn't know when I was looking at your LinkedIn that you can hit the see more experiences button, because usually people have like 5 or 6 jobs, but like I did that like 3 times. Like you have a lot of experience in working in places, on shows at least, which I'm sure you know. So yeah, we're going to be talking about one thing, kind of what Reena does as a business, which is helping people get more exposure out there, and she does it well. But also talking about her podcast, which is pretty interesting format. And I mean, we could just talk about it right now. It's called Better Call Daddy. I almost said Better Call Her Daddy. I'm thinking of Call Her Daddy. And it's an interesting format how you have your dad involved in the show. Which can you, I mean, we can just hop right into it, I guess. Can you talk about that? Like how you have your dad involved in your podcast?
So my dad is my biggest confidant. I call him pretty much daily for all advice. And he had been begging me to do my own show for about 20 years. I've worked behind the scenes of other people. And so I decided to step out into the spotlight and reconnect with some of the people that I've met along the way. And I roped him into being a part of the show as well.
Yes. And it's interesting that you guys got to listen to it. But firstly, I want to talk about you and what you do. Because I think it's interesting. Can you talk about that, like from, I guess, the start, like where you started out, how you got into like production and, into creative endeavors, and then how, try to take that, 360 to starting a podcast and kind of what that's about. So
I started off in radio, actually, which kind of...
It's almost archaic.
Podcasting, right? I love connecting with people and finding good stories. I started off reading the news and weather, which was just me scouring the newswire and taking what came across the newswire and rewriting it and making it more interesting. And I worked in radio before it was even automated. So, sometimes when there's dead air, you just had to think quick on your feet. That was like DJing essentially.
Or like have the sound effects buttons and everything. And yeah.
Yeah. So started off in radio, wanted to work in radio. I went to Purdue, worked for an NPR station there for 2 years. And then I drove up to Chicago, interviewed at WGN, didn't get the job, but in the same courtyard, Jerry Springer had posted a flyer saying that they were looking for interns. And so I walked across the courtyard, told him I had an interview, got through security, and started 2 weeks later.
And what did you do at Jerry Springer?
I started off as an intern, and it was great because I was new to the city, and it was my job to take the guests around town and entertain them with petty cash, which was awesome. So I was taking them on double-decker buses and boat ride trips in Navy Pier, and I was learning the city alongside them and got to go to House of Blues.
Wait, so you're saying Jerry Springer wasn't real people?
No, they were real people.
Oh, okay. Oh, they were real people. Okay, they weren't actors?
No. They were real people, and I'm from Kentucky, so I felt like a lot of their stories weren't so far-fetched. So I just became friends with them, and that's what I really learned at Jerry Springer was that when you become friends with the people that are going to be on the show, they trust you, they like you, they're willing to open up to you, and that makes a good story.
Interesting. Okay. And at that time, were you guys the first ones to do, or I guess Jerry Springer, was he like the first one to do that type of show? Or it was like...
So he started off wanting to be more like Geraldo. he wanted to tell more serious stories, but then the ratings were in the toilet. And so that's when the fights began.
Gotcha. And do you have like your favorite story from that experience, those years there?
Everybody always asks me that. So I do have my favorite story. Every time I think of this one because it's so crazy, but there was a 14-year-old that called the show and she caught her grandmother in bed with her boyfriend and she was pregnant by him and she suspected that the mom was sleeping with him too. And then turns out the mom was sleeping with him too or had slept with him too. And she had just gotten out of prison. And I booked the grandmother, the mom, the daughter, and the punk 18-year-old boyfriend. And it went the whole show.
Wait, he was 18?
Yeah.
And she was 14? Oh, so did he get in trouble?
No. It was consensual.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's legal even if it's consensual?
I don't know. But she gave the baby up to the state.
Okay. That's a crazy story. Okay. That must have been awkward being with all three of them. Were they all three together at that point or?
They all lived in the same double wide, yeah.
Okie dokie. Hope they're doing well. Whatever their name is. Shout out to that family.
Shout out to Georgia.
Oh man. Okay, so how did you like, where did you go from there? Like, what are the things you got into, and then how'd you get to where you are now, like doing what you do?
Oh my gosh, there's been so many steps, but from there, so I started off as an intern and I was entertaining the guests, but then I also got on the phone and I was listening to the people on the phone and I was like, whoa, I was like, the people that are getting the craziest guests are screamers. They are getting pumped, excited on the phone. I was like, I can do that. So I was like, hey, let me try. I was like, put me on the phone. And so I just had an act for it and I started booking stories and I went from intern to associate producer in a couple of months. So that equals from zero money to 50,000 in a couple of months. So I went from crashing on somebody's couch and having like one suitcase to then living on the Gold Coast. And I ended up working on the show for 2 full seasons. I went from intern to producer in 1 season. So I got my own office in NBC Tower. And I also was able to get into the Producers Guild of America just from the one show. And then I produced the season opener for the 3rd season. And I had a guest come up to me and say, how can you live with yourself? They felt like I was ruining their life. I was like, dude, you knew what you were getting into. This is no happy endings on this show. You know what I mean? But at the same time, it did really kind of make me think. I was like, okay, maybe I could work on something a little bit more redeeming where I'm not pitting people against each other all day. I mean, that's fun and I'm in my 20s, but I think I'm ready for my next chapter. So I ended up moving out to LA and not knowing anyone and starting all the way over again. I took an executive assistant role to 3 pretty seasoned producers at a special effects animation company. It was a family-run company, and answered the phone, learned accounts payable and receivable, worked on a big production, Team America, which was a Paramount feature presentation. And, I started learning about SAG contracts and location scouting and rewrites and working with writers and producers and the other side of the business. And then from there, I was able to network and get a job at VH1 and go on the road and work on some e-shows and get back into being a post-production supervisor, a producer, working with reality stars. It was a whole nother level of learning.
And that ties into a lot of what you do now, right? Like, I guess, leveraging networks and helping people.
And just building relationships. So much of it is relationships. I recently reconnected with, a nanny from Nanny 911 that I worked with for 3 seasons. And she's like, Reena, I've been putting off my LinkedIn like the plague. Can you help me? I'm like, yes, I can help you. I know copywriters. I know graphic designers. I know you. I know what you should be saying about yourself. So there you go.
For some reason, when you said nanny, I thought of the old show Fran or The Nanny, and it had Fran, her voice, man. If she had a podcast, man, that would be the weirdest thing to listen to. That voice. Is she still alive?
That nanny. Yeah, it's like super nasally. I can't handle that, actually.
Yeah, well, I hope that wasn't real. Okay, so when did you take the leap and like go on your own and like
The entrepreneur
what did
thing.
that,
I've done it a couple
what did
of
that look
times.
like? Yeah, how did that start, and then how did that evolve?
So I joined the corporate world for a little bit. I had 3 kids in 4 years and took a bit of a mommy break. But while I was doing the mommy thing and my kids were in preschool, I was still like grabbing court cases and working on a court TV show for 5 seasons. So I was keeping my foot in the door, and that was fulfilling the story junkie in me where I was, combing through small claims cases and picking stories that I thought were good. And that even led to me working on divorce court and hot bench and casting for a season of America's Got Talent, just keeping my contacts in the industry. But that didn't pay very well. And then when my kids got a little bit older, I decided to try being a program manager and a director of marketing and sales for a financial firm. And in both of those roles, I was using LinkedIn to fill events. And then I connected with a producer of a Gary Vee event. And she was like, hey, could you help me with sponsorships? I was like, never done that before, but why not? Probably, And then I was like, oh, wow, I actually like the entrepreneurial space way better than the finance space, way better than the voice over IP space. Like I liked using LinkedIn to fill events and using LinkedIn for marketing and connecting with people and relationship building, but I didn't like those industries as much. And then I like loved the entrepreneur space. I was like, okay, yeah. So I just kept kind of pivoting, really. I was learning along the way, like things I liked from each role. But then I was like, I think I'm ready to do this. Like I've filled up events in the financial space. I've filled up, corporate lunch and learns in the voice over IP space. Now I've worked in the entrepreneur space. Why not do it for myself? So I started getting some of my own clients. And then one of my clients asked me to go full time with her. So I tried that for 7 months, which was cool because I worked for like a high touch coaching program and it was, close to a 7-figure launch. And I made a lot of connections that way, and being associated with somebody high profile like that definitely helped my business. But then again, I was like, okay, now I'm reporting to someone again. I want to step back out on my own. So it's been pretty recent. Honestly, it's been since COVID where I had 4 kids home and I'm like, okay, I can only work at night. Can't work all day anymore. Can't have a nanny anymore. Right.
Yeah. When did you start on LinkedIn, by the way?
Oh my gosh. I've been on there forever. It's probably 2009-ish.
Okay. Yeah. I was using MySpace in 2009.
I did that too.
Okay. So I think one thing that's cool about where you came from is it always had an element of stories, like everything you saw and sourced and had a. So I'm curious, like in your mind, like what is that criteria that you like? This is a good story. Obviously, I guess it's dependent on the show, and what you're going for in the audience. But like, what made a good story to you?
It's really the person that makes a good story, because you can have a good story on paper, but if somebody is not willing to be raw and vulnerable and let you ask them anything, then it's not a good story. It's the person. It's totally the person. Like I've had people call into shows and they're like, they tell me a fantastic story, but then you want to dig deeper and they clam up, right? So you need somebody who's just an open book, wears their heart on their sleeve, is not afraid to come out of the shadows and into the light.
Yeah.
The more controversial, the better.
Yeah, because that allows you to go into like rabbit holes or like kind of have a story progress, etc. So yeah.
Last night I talked.
The more controversial, the better. I like that.
Yeah. Last night I talked to this chick. She was like, yeah, I teach sex ed. I was like, what ages have you worked with? And I'm like, let's talk about pulling out a dental dam. Do you let your kids taste that? You know what I mean? I want somebody who will talk about anything. No holds barred, right?
Yeah, that as long as your show's marked as explicit, you're fine.
Actually, I had to add that in order to get accepted to Apple.
Yeah, which I mean, I don't think it's a problem unless someone reports you. Which I don't know if the people do that on Apple actually. Okay, so So knowing that that's important, let's say that, because obviously a lot of people listen to this podcast, they're in different niches. What would you recommend are the easiest ways to find good people, if that's the most important part of the story, for interviewing, for storytelling, etc.?
I have found some of my best guests by creating a Facebook group of the people I already know and just asking questions. Like, do you talk to your kids about sex? Or what would you ask a Paralympic? Or what would you ask a food blogger? What would you ask somebody who's had an organ transplant? So I ask questions, like I use my Facebook group as a sounding board. And then the subject matters which are responded to the most, I'm like, okay, there's interest there.
Gotcha. I'm just taking a note of that. Okay. And so now, like, I guess for the podcast space, what kind of work are you doing right now in the podcast space? Because I know, I think I got introduced to you because you were some work you did with Kathy Heller, or I reached out to you because I saw her face and I'm like, oh, it's a familiar face. So yeah, what are you up to now in the podcasting space?
Well, right now I'm working on my own podcast.
Yes.
I have worked for her on 2 separate occasions. It actually started because I knew her prior to being famous. Like, I knew her when she was single. I knew her when I lived in LA. I knew her before she took off with her music. And I had reached out to her on like 3 separate occasions. So the first time I reached out to her, I was casting for America's Got Talent. And I was like, hey, I know your music is taking off. Would you be interested in being on this? So I submitted her for it. She didn't get picked. And then the second time I reached out to her, I was doing sponsorships for Gary Vee, and she was like getting ready to write a book and her community was growing. And then I was like, hey, do you want to be a sponsor? This would be a good way to connect with him. And she wasn't ready. And then the third time I reached out to her, I was co-hosting another podcast with a friend, and there was a guest that was on our show, and he had turned a passion into business, which is what her show is all about, right? So he was a backup dancer to Madonna and Britney Spears and Selena Gomez and some pretty big names. And I was like, and now he has his own studio in Burbank and he trains other dancers, and he's got 2 million subscribers on YouTube. And she was like, oh yeah, I totally want to film him in front of a live audience. And I was like, oh, cool. I was like, well, I haven't seen you in 12 years and I have never met him in person other than interviewing him. And that doesn't happen every day. So I hopped a flight to LA and connected with them. And then she was like, whoa, she's like, can you get me more guests like that? I was like, yeah. So she hired me originally to book her guests. And I ended up booking her Howard Schultz and Barbara Corcoran and Derek Sivers and some big names. And then that led to me working on one of her events and booking her sponsors, and more responsibilities got tagged on.
How important do you think it is to get big names on your show?
So I go...
Like in her case, was that really important for, because she's kind of blown up, right?
I go back and forth iTunes, with that because like...
You're less likely to promote. I know that, your show. Like compared to a micro-influencer, they'll post your stuff, they'll promote it, etc. Versus a big person, they're on all day. They're not going to post it on their profiles, right?
You're 100% right with that. And you need to think about your purpose of why you're even doing this. Like, are you doing this for ego, or are you doing this to community build? Are you doing this? Why? Right?
Yeah. So in her case, like, how did her podcast get success, you think?
Well, she had some success with her music business. That's really where she started making money.
Gotcha.
And then she started putting on big events and really building her community. And she didn't really start making money with the podcast until right before COVID. Like, her music business was supporting her other business.
Gotcha. Interesting podcast cover on Better Call Daddy. She actually had the background before, but it was on Zoom, so you guys can get to experience that. I can't pull it up. When I Googled that, every single picture that came up was Call Her Daddy.
I feel like that's fortunate, actually, placement for my show. because I'm like, they might want to listen to that show and then click on mine.
Because I think it's the same kind of like tongue in cheek, type of content. Which is, do you listen to that show?
I don't. Do you?
Was it an inspiration for the name? No. I don't think I would relate with their stories.
For the name was my dad. I call my dad every day.
Gotcha. Oh, but I think because the word daddy, that's why I thought there was a correlation.
And it's funny, when I had on David Meltzer, he's like, you totally stole the best idea for a podcast, mommy and daddy issues. And yes, I want to cover mommy and daddy issues, but it's also a safe space for controversy. Like, I love a controversial subject matter.
That you're used to that. That's how you came up. So, do you think if you were still casting at America's Got Talent, or that show is still active, right? Would TikTok be involved in that? You think, like, or at least finding people on TikTok? I feel like that would be a good.
Oh, I'm sure they scour TikTok. When I just worked on that one season, I was scouring YouTube for new names. Yeah, they definitely look there.
Okay, so how much experience do you have with sponsors?
Sponsors?
Yeah, like
I have
sponsors. Some. Okay, do you have one for your podcast?
I do.
I remember, yeah, I think I heard it. Okay. So when is someone ready for a sponsor, you think, for a podcast?
I tried to go after sponsors even before I launched.
Interesting concept. Okay. So people don't, so then I guess, how do you pitch sponsors?
Well, again, it's about relationships, right?
Yeah.
So sponsors, some of them, they're like, oh, what's your demographic? What's your download number? I'm like, look, I know what big podcasters are charging. And when I reach their level, my rates are going to go way up. So you want to get in now while I'm just covering costs.
Interesting. So you do the scarcity, or urgency type play? Okay.
Totally.
Would you recommend that for everyone, or do you have to have a certain amount of clout, like experience, right? Because you probably have some credibility, so they kind of believe you, right? Or
one sponsor liked the fact that I reached a Jeffrey Epstein survivor.
So they saw there's can be a possibility for something to hit, like a virality element.
They were just interested in the subject matters that I wanted to cover. And, Manscaped is a little bit of a controversial brand, so they felt mission aligned. I think that's a big thing to think about when reaching out to sponsors is, what is their message? What is their mission? And are the people that are going to be listening to your show their audience?
Gotcha. And so how do you go about finding potential sponsors who would resonate or who would kind of be on board with your message or the type of content you do? How did you go about, why did you choose Manscaped? I see them everywhere, by the way.
They were controversial. I was like, hey, Dad, would you do that? And he was like, yeah. I was like, that's hysterical. I was like, dude, my dad's willing to freaking shave his balls. That's funny. That just shows that that's controversial. And me and my dad are talking about things that we've never talked about before. And he's willing to do things that other people aren't and maybe change stereotypes. And Manscaped is wanting to change the stereotype of below the belt grooming.
That's a good tagline. And I guess that it makes sense that he's part of the show, where he is listening to everything everyone has to say and open-minded, and then gives his opinion. How does your dad involved in the show? What does that process look like?
And okay, so that's also changed from the beginning. Me and my dad had to kind of work out what worked, right? So in the beginning, I thought, okay, I'll just interview people and I'll tell my dad about it and then he'll react. But that didn't work, right? The way to have the most authentic reaction, and I even had him on a call too, and then had him muted and then had him respond after. But the best is me interview somebody cut it down to what it's going to be edited to, and then play my dad the edited segment and then have him react to that. So that's kind of what we do now.
When he's reacting, like, so what is he trying to like, cover, or like, how does his, like, I guess, how does he explain it usually, like at the end of the interviews?
So sometimes I have the guests ask my dad a question, or we might have talked about something during the conversation that I want to ask my dad about. So like tomorrow's episode, I'm actually passing the mic to my intern. She's been with me since day one, and she has a great relationship with her father, and he's from Zimbabwe, and he raised her in Japan. And so during the conversation with her dad, she said, "What was your favorite childhood memory of me?" And I was like, "Oh, that'd be a cool question to ask my dad." So that is going to be at the tail end of the episode with the pass the mic.
He's never told you that?
Well, I just want to hear what he would first respond and tell me, right? It could have been a variety of stories. What's been really cool is like talking to my dad about sexual abuse and murderers and a KKK member that wanted to be a Jew. At first, my dad was like, "I don't know if you should interview him." But then after he heard the guy's story, he was like, "I kind of liked him. I might have him over for Shabbos." Like,
I don't even know what that is. Shabbos.
Oh, it's like a day of rest where you have like a Friday night dinner together and you unplug and don't use, any electronics for 24 hours.
That's a big leap to say you invite that person. But so I guess let's talk about your podcast. So like, what's the big ambition with it? Like, what are you working on? Yeah. Like, where do you see it going?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that's amazingly cool. By having a podcast and by having a platform, I'm now getting reached out to by companies, oh my goodness. I got reached out to by a doctor today out of LA, and she sent me some of her protein powder to try. And she was like, "Hey, if you like the protein powder, would you like to be one of our brand ambassadors?" I was like, "Hey, would you like to sponsor the show? Then I will talk about your protein powder." She was like, "Send me your analytics." And then we have a conversation around what I told you in the beginning.
That's the way to do it.
Yep.
So, yeah. And I will say, like, doing an entertainment show is more difficult because there's not like a quicker or easy or kind of obvious path to like revenue or monetizing. It's probably more of you have to build up that trust and make good content, right? It's a lot of meritocracy there, like if your content sucks, the idea could be good, but people won't listen. So what tips would you give people who are trying to go that route? Like, make a podcast that's more entertaining, not necessarily like teaching or educational, more like story based. What big tips would you give people around developing something like that?
Drink.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, if you're over 18, if you want to start a podcast and you're not over 18, well, apple juice?
Oh, no, really, I would look into what's trending on Quora, what's trending on Twitter. What shows are people watching? Can you reach some of those people? I'm doing all of that. Like, I loved Indian matchmaking. So I reached out to every single person that was on the show, and 3 of them said yes. And I interviewed 2 of them.
That's a show?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sounds like an app.
And then I watched another show on Netflix and loved one of those stories. Even my editor was like, "Oh my God, like this chick was in the news. See if you can reach her." And then I did, right? So stories that touch you, stories that you're curious about, authors that your kids like, musicians, YouTubers, there's endless ideas. I literally have shot 75 episodes in the last 3 months, and I'm like, I can't get them out quick enough.
Which one's been your favorite so far?
That's a really tough question. I will say that Evan Carmichael,
that was like your first one, right?
My first guest. And I love that story. I loved his energy. I got super nervous for it, but I have somebody on the calendar for next week that I tried to book for Kathy and got a no. And now he's going to be on my show. So I'm pretty excited about that. I'm not going to tell you who it is until I got them on.
That's for next week? It's coming out next week?
I'm taping it.
Oh, you're taping it next week. Okay. Is it a male or female?
It's a male, and he has 1 million followers on LinkedIn.
Oh, connections or followers? You can have followers on LinkedIn? I guess I'm not that famous yet. Okay. So I have some of my favorite questions here that I usually like to ask people.
Okay.
I think it's just interesting. So what is your spirit animal?
Oh my God, that's tough. I have a bunny.
So that's your spirit animal?
Maybe.
Okay, bunnies are cool. My grandfather actually has like a big ranch and he has tons of bunnies.
Yeah?
Yeah, but I think they eat them, so we're not going to get into that. I'm vegetarian, but apparently bunny meat is soft, so I don't know. I didn't mean to make you sad there.
I don't think I could eat the bunny, but he is nice and plump.
Yes, they are plump. My friend has a bunny and he has a Roomba and he says it always tries to like have sex with the Roomba. So like he can't even like use the Roomba.
Now I need a Roomba.
So no, unless he's trying to have your bunny procreate with the Roomba.
My bunny can't procreate anymore. But what's really funny is we had 2 Sheltie collies growing up, and my dad won me one of those big Snoopy dogs at the fair. Yeah, the collies attacked Snoopy. They used to hump that thing, tore it apart.
So what's something you used to believe 3-5 years ago that you don't believe today?
Be nice to everyone.
Oh, you don't believe be nice to everyone anymore?
Not anymore.
Okay. Gotcha. And what's your favorite podcast?
Oh, that's a good question. James Alchester. I was like obsessed with him this summer. I watched so many of his lives. He's captivating. Yeah,
he had one. I've heard him be interviewed a lot of times. Like he has a lot of crazy stuff that's happened in his life because he went rich and broke so much, which I think you can learn a lot from people who go up and down in life. You can figure out what's the big thing that caused that. Those are my favorite questions. Yay! I play this soundtrack, the typical clapping thing.
What's your favorite podcast?
What's my favorite podcast? Obviously, my podcast. It's hard to say because I have like, there's entertainment ones and then there's like educational, but you're not gonna like my answer. It has to do with basketball. It's JJ Redick.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say it's my favorite. It's just what I'm listening to right now, because it's a past NBA player who interviews NBA players, which is what I think. Podcast has allowed media to go to individuals a lot more, which I like. Not necessarily like, even though there are a lot of big companies and networks getting into it, like Barstool Sports, and the biggest podcasts are like Wall Street Journal, a lot of news media outlets, daily news. But it's allowing, like, especially in the sports arena, like for people to have more voices, I guess, celebrities, etc.
I'd like to interview Rodman.
Dennis Rodman?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, did you see The Last Dance?
I did. And I bought my dad an autographed freaking Rodman shirt. I got conned off of Instagram. I thought he was actually talking to me, but it was totally a staffer. And I was like, my dad and I watched all 6 NBA, Chicago championship games. And I just loved Rodman. He was such a character.
Yeah, if you do, I feel like you will, knowing you get Dennis Rodman one day. Please ask him just to tell you about how adorable Kim Jong-un is, because apparently he loves Kim Jong-un.
Okay, writing that down.
Or something about him, because I know they're best friends, which is weird.
How did that happen?
I don't know. I think Kim Jong-un watched him as a kid playing basketball. And he probably had some respect to him, and then maybe they reached out to him, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm a crazy guy. You're a crazy guy. Let's connect."
I actually know somebody who's interviewed him, so I'm going to reach out to her after this. I just had a thought.
Yes, please, and then let me know when you do that. So, so everyone I want to listen to that. Or maybe suggest some questions. So everyone who's listening, you can go check out Reena's podcast, Better Call Daddy. It's a fun listen, which is rare with most podcasts. They're always almost the same format or kind of like straight interview. But yeah, anything else you want to share, or where people can follow you, learn more, etc.?
I'm a LinkedIn-aholic, so if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, Reena Watts, and I have a Facebook group. It's called Business Laughs in LinkedIn. That's where I'm springboarding all my questions.
I just joined the group, by the way.
Nice.
LinkedIn-aholic. LinkedIn-aholic. That would be good on a shirt. I think that would be Better Call
Daddy. I was thinking about making some socks. 1 foot me, 1 foot my daddy.
Yes. You should. So have you applied for LinkedIn Live?
I have, but that was before my podcast.
Yeah, you should. Because I got accepted. I don't know how. I'm not that famous on LinkedIn a while ago. Like we're on LinkedIn right now. I'll tag you. But I think it's because I did in the application, I put a lot of info about some other cool stuff I do. And they're like, oh, he does shit. So let's accept him. If you did like a Linkaholic hour or something, it was like a happy hour for LinkedIn, just drinking with people on LinkedIn, like that would be perfect.
Apple juice, of course.
Yeah. Obviously Martinelli's. But I think that would be funny to see on LinkedIn. So there you go. Cool. So I appreciate you being on. It's you have a lot of cool stuff, or just fun, interesting life you've lived.
Aw.
So, yeah. So
thank you.
Thanks guys for watching, and see you guys in the next episode. Peace out.